Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make. And folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason.
Oh, hi. Welcome to the Road to Reason program, The Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. I'm Stephanie Gatormson, your host, and this is Kayla Terzak, our co-host for today. How are you, Kayla?
I'm pretty good. How are you today?
I'm super fantastic.
You stoked for the show?
I am very stoked. Okay. I'm so excited for today.
Yeah, we're gonna chew out some Scientology.
We are.
Okay.
We're gonna rip a piece off. We're gonna chew on it for a little while with Chris Shelton. He'll be joining us a little later in the show to talk about his new book.
Yeah.
We'll tell you the...
No, it's right here.
Is it? No. It's Scientology, A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is all about. I memorized it.
Awesome.
I know things.
Good job.
So you can catch us. We stream live on Sundays. If you're watching, that's obvious. We're on channel 36 here locally in the Fairfax area. Cool. Just making sure. Not used to being in Virginia. All of our shows end up on YouTube at Road to Reason TV. And you can follow our Facebook page. That's going to be super, super fun if you go like us on Facebook, because things happen, things get posted. So go follow us.
You can know more about our shows before we actually have them. We announce them beforehand.
Those are true. Those are true facts. So I think I do want to jump right into the announcements. That way we can, the faster we get through them, the faster we get to talk to Chris.
All right.
Who is, by the way, an ex-member of the Church of Scientology. Did you know that?
I did. Did you know that?
I did. I did know that. Okay, so first up, I just want to give you a quick heads up that the Reason Rally is going to be June 4th here at the Lincoln Memorial. Speakers include Cy Babe, Cara Santa Maria, James Randi, Eugenie Scott, Paul Provenza, and the biologist Richard Dawkins.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We also wanted to announce, this is my pet project. I like to talk about the Hotline Project. One of the goals of the atheist community is just to reach out to people who are coming out of religious faiths, whether they were strongly in a cult or whether they kind of sort of had a faith but wanted to kind of rethink about, you know, whether they believe in God or believe what they believe. The Hotline Project is it was recently released, and it's a really helpful hotline that you can call that and just get information. It's just conversational. No one's trying to convince you in or out of any kind of belief or thought. The phone number that you can call is 844-368-2848 if you would like some more information.
Let's do that one more time, just in case anyone's half writing that down.
All right. It is 844-368-2848. Also, you can just look up Hotline Project, the Recovering from Religion, and you should be able to find it online. There's a whole website. It's very clear.
Absolutely. recoveringfromreligion.org. That's O-R-G at the end of that, if you didn't know. Yes.
O-R-G.
So we had a hard time coming up with a joke this week, because Scientology doesn't lend itself to a lot of jokes. But just in the studio, we decided to come up with one ourselves, and it is this. Did you know that when Elron was, after he was caught, evading taxes, he cleaned up his life a little bit and opened up a cabinetry store.
What do you call it?
Elron's Cupboards.
That was great.
I'm sorry to everyone that just heard that. I apologize to you for hurting your ears. Anyway, so to some news. I think I'm going to let Kayla kick this off.
Okay.
With some
So I found a report
news
by The Independent, and they reported that the New York Times International, that partners with the New York Times in Bangladesh, they actually edited out an article in their version of the New York Times today. So apparently there was an article written, and it basically talked about a whole bunch of different Bangladeshi bloggers and journalists. These specific bloggers and journalists were secular bloggers and journalists who spoke out against, just persecution of LGBT members, gender rights, civil rights in general, and also had a lot of violence enacted towards them. They were either killed, harassed, or somehow attacked in some way. And so the entire article, which was on the front page, was edited out of the front page. So I just thought that was really interesting, because one of the biggest reasons why has to do with, just criticism of Islam in general tends to come with a lot of backlash, especially in those countries where you're not allowed to step up and say, hey, like this aspect of our religion is keeping gender equality from being like a real thing. And so that was one of the, it was Islamic groups who actually reached out and hurt these people. So I just thought it was a really interesting thing to look out for, because these kind of things happen all the time. Journalism in the Western world, in my opinion, is an easy sport comparatively. Any kind of journalist or blogger in the United States should just throw up their hands and just say, this is just an amazing thing that we get to sit here on public access TV and trash our country's religion. So.
No, that's awesome. I wanted to also point out that these bloggers are super, super brave.
Yeah.
For even just writing that kind of stuff in Bangladesh, because of obviously these things happening and some other not so pleasant things happening.
There will always be people who are willing to stand up for what's right, stand up for people's rights, and it's an amazing thing that we get to stand here and say, hey, they are just amazing people. Yeah.
No, they are. The next piece of news is a little morbid, so content warning.
Aw.
An Arizona woman recently was shot for being an atheist. She was pregnant.
Oh.
She was shot in the eye by her friend. Let's see, her name was Anitra Braxton. She was 39 years old. Police responded to her house on December 26th, where they found a 3-day-old body that was shot directly in the eye. And the suspect had said that she shot this person because they didn't believe in God. And they were keeping the body around as a shrine from God.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
No, those are facts, unfortunately. And it's those kind of things that really scare me.
It is scary, but at the same time, we do
atheist.
live in a country, like I was saying, like we were talking about before, there's the kind of persecution that comes towards atheists in this country is vastly different from any kind of persecution that people get in other countries that might not think that atheism is appropriate. So,
Sure.
It is definitely scary, but it's kind of, you said the lady had a shrine to God, she seemed a little bit unhinged. So
Yeah, no, but I mean, she was saying that keeping the body itself was the shrine.
Yeah.
It was sitting on her couch.
That sounds a little bit like insanity to me.
She had the body on her couch for 3 days.
Yeah. That's crazy. What?
Yeah. How do you sit next to a dead body for 3 days?
That's what I was saying. You know how some people, they take an instance like this and they say, okay, persecution of, someone will do something against a Christian, for instance.
Sure.
And there is a deliberate action against a Christian because they are a Christian. And all of a sudden, all the Christian community is feeling like they are going to be attacked as this one Christian was attacked. I think that there's a very big difference between that and actual persecution.
Sure, certainly, yeah.
I don't think that we're being persecuted that way, but it's definitely a scary thought.
Yeah, I mean, just...
Kayla, this is God.
Hi, God.
I just want to make it very clear that when you all persecute Christians for not cooking cakes, that's very serious business and it shouldn't be taken lightly.
Thank you, God.
Okay.
That was so helpful.
You're welcome. That's what
I
I'm here for.
appreciate it.
I think he wants us to persecute Christians more, take it more seriously.
But hey, God, if you're still there, would you mind curing world hunger real quick? That would be awesome.
No, I'm too busy. Sorry.
Oh, Tim
Okay.
Tebow needs you. Got it. Cool. Hey, it's all right. Football's important too.
It is very important.
So I think that's all we have for news and all we have for announcements. And so we're going to take a short break here in a second. But first, I wanted to give you a quick run-in for our guest today. As we mentioned, Chris Shelton is the author of Scientology, A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really about. He's an ex-member,
Ex-member.
He is an ex-member of the Church of Scientology and speaks out against the church as an activist and its cult behavior and its dangerous control over its members. So you're going to see a few messages from some local sponsors, I guess. I think that's what they're
Some
called.
PSAs and local sponsors.
Awesome. So you'll get to see those now.
Homemade noodles.
Right?
Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes on your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think then? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
A critical thinker is in a frame of mind of always questioning everything, including things they don't necessarily want to question. You may have done some research and satisfied yourself on a position you're sure is right. Good. Now, after a month or two of that, go look at some research that opposes your point of view or challenges the position you've taken. You can even look into it with the idea of poking holes in their arguments if you want, but it would be better to just have an open mind and read it as though you'd never heard or seen anything on the issue before. You may be very surprised what you learn, and if you're doing this right, you will be. Always be open to opposing points of view and counter arguments. That's what critical thinking is all about. And now you know.
That makes sense.
We're back.
We are back. That is very cool. I'm so glad we got to see a little quick PSA for Chris Shelton, because that's who's going to be coming on right now. So I think we should welcome in Chris if he's on.
Hi,
And
Chris.
how's it going? Can everyone hear him?
There he is.
Okay, great. Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you for coming on again. You've been on our show a couple times.
I have, and it's always been fun. I've always enjoyed being part of this.
All right.
Well, fantastic. I did want to ask you just so if the people don't know, you are a former Scientologist. Tell us a little bit about your just a Cliff Notes version of like the history and how you got into it.
Basically born and raised in it. I mean, my parents got involved when I was very young, about 4 years old. I was fortunate that they didn't push it off on me too hard. I got involved formally when I was 15 years old. I started working for the organization right out of high school when I was 17. And I became sort of a professional Scientologist working for them. After 8 years of working at the local church level, I moved up to the C organization, which is its sort of elite clergy. And I did that for 17 more years. So it was about 3 years ago that I left them, and 2 years ago that I was formally expelled from the church for dissent and speaking out publicly against it.
Oh, wow. Real quick, another Cliff's Note. So what made you start thinking outside of that Scientology bubble? Like, what made you start criticizing it?
What happened exactly was that after I got out of the Sea organization, I still wanted to be a Scientologist, and I still believed in Hubbard's works until I got on the internet, which is something that Scientologists don't do. And I started finding out the facts about L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology and what it was really all about. And it's kind of hard to believe that you could be involved in something like that for so many years and not know certain things. But we were just not allowed to be exposed to that information. And in fact, we're fed a whole lot of other information that made it seem like L. Ron Hubbard was the exact opposite of what he actually was. So you had this worldview of Hubbard and Scientology that was totally wrong. And once I started finding out that that was not the case, I reacted very negatively against that because, of course, I'd been taken advantage of for all those years, and I wasn't happy about that.
Wow.
That is...
So the information control completely. They didn't say, oh, well, if you see this, this is really what it is. They're just liars. It was complete information control. No one's allowed to look at it.
That's exactly the case. They are very, very good at information control. And, of course, being in the Sea organization for those 17 years, I didn't have access to TV and radio and the internet like everybody else does because you're in an environment where you're working for the church 24/7. You know, they give you all the food, all the, your living quarters, all of that. And so it's very communal living, and it's very, very controlled.
Well, I guess if they're going to try and control the information you get, they're going to have to control all those other aspects of your life too. It also helps with the other things we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we'll talk about other things. I'm fascinated, but I'll do other interviews.
It's a high control group. That's the best way that I can, and it's very hard to easily get across how high that control was.
Yeah, I was a part of a cult or control group. I like to call them control groups because there's different variants. You say cult, and there's a huge difference between Scientology and the church, the ICOC, which is what I was a part of. But it wasn't that big of a control group. It was just kind of on the cusp of kind of dangerous. But so that's interesting. Anyway,
no, that's crazy. It'll be good to hear the difference in experiences. I did want to ask you though about their tax-exempt status and how they got that, if you know.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in my book actually that covers the tax-exempt status of the church and how exactly that was gotten, because it was a war. They lost their tax-exempt status in 1967, and they didn't get it back until 1993. And there was it was a very pitched battle between the Scientology and the IRS to get that. And really, I mean, a summary is they wore the IRS down. That's actually what happened. There's a lot more details given in the book about how they went about doing that, and it's quite extraordinary and kind of hard to believe because everybody looks at the IRS and thinks they're this vast, powerful, monolithic organization that nobody could ever take on, but Scientology did.
What does their tax-exempt status and the story of them getting it and how they got it, what does that mean for other organizations or for the public at large?
Tax exemption for the church means a lot of things for Scientology. Most importantly, it means that they are able to keep their profits. If you imagine Scientology as a for-profit corporation that uses religious cloaking to hide what it's really doing, that's a pretty accurate view. So all that money that comes in, they don't have to pay taxes, they don't have to pay property taxes, that sort of thing. The fact that their parishioners get to write off their services, that doesn't really matter to the church very much. That's sort of like icing on the cake for them. The big thing is that they get to keep all that money that they're sucking in from their parishioners, and that's a big deal when you're talking about taxes to the United States government, because they would normally, if you're a corporation, they take quite a bit, And so they're able to amass a lot of money. And also, because of the religious exemption, because they have tax-exempt status and religious recognition by the IRS, that made it a lot easier for the courts to recognize them as a religion. And now that they have that religious recognition in the courts, they have First Amendment protection to do basically anything they want to do under the guise of religious conduct. And that's how they get away with so much of the harassment and the stalking and the really crazy Gestapo tactics that they run on critics and ex-members.
So they get an exemption for their actions in the courts.
Because they're because they're protected by the First Amendment and freedom of religion. That's a very wide, big brush that they can use to paint their activities as religious activities. For example, a few years ago, I think 2005 or 6, there was a court case in California where a couple of ex-members took them to court for human rights violations and abuses. And the church was able to counter those arguments by saying that what they were doing was religious practice. And the court took the church's side on that, even though it was very clearly abusive practice.
Didn't they have their own court system that they don't really use, that they were using to say, hey, we have our own court system, we can try ourselves within the court? Or am I misunderstanding
They actually
something?
beat a fraud case with that just last year in Florida. There was a man who took the Church of Scientology to court for fraud because the church bilked him out of hundreds of thousands of dollars under false pretenses. This was Luis Garcia. And the church argued in court that they have their own internal system of negotiation and handling of these matters. And the guy had signed contracts saying he would agree to, do that. And so the court said, okay, you're right. And they threw the fraud case out. And I thought we all thought that was absolutely insane. But that is what the court did. And so they turned it over to the church to decide whether the church defrauded this man of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what do you think the outcome of that case is going to be?
Well, obviously.
Because there's a precedent now.
Exactly.
How does the Church of Scientology get around the notion of what are deemed generally applicable laws that would, say, prevent someone from saying, well, taking this illegal drug, for instance, and this has been there have actually been cases regarding, like, say, peyote and other forms of drugs, where they say that your religion stops at what are called generally applicable laws. So the drug law applies to everybody equally. There's no focus, say, on someone who's doing peyote for religious reasons. It's just illegal for everyone.
Even if they're religious.
Right.
reasons.
So with things like harassment and things like that, I want to know how the Church of Scientology gets around those, what would generally be deemed those generally applicable laws for everybody else.
Well, okay, good. It's a good question. Right now in Texas, there's actually a court case happening with Marty and Monique Rathman against the church for harassment and stalking, because the church actually went after them for months. They engaged in a 6-month campaign of basically terror against this couple and followed them around for years. And at first it was being argued that this was First Amendment, freedom of speech, right? Freedom of religion, this sort of thing. And yet the way the church screwed up on this is they went after Monique, and Monique was the wife of Marty, was never a Scientologist, never had anything to do with Scientology ever in her life. So she never agreed to any of the religious practices or nonsense that the church gets up to. And so they are quite literally fighting a life or death battle in that courtroom right now. And Scientology shows up with 12 lawyers at a time, piling into the courtroom to defend themselves and make their case. And this case has been they're doing every delay tactic they can to avoid this case even going to trial. So they have a lot of money to drag these things out, and that's another tactic that they use to not have to fess up to and take responsibility for the charges brought against them.
Yeah, and that's hard because no one person wants their life ruined because they have to spend their entire life working on this one lawsuit they're going to get harassed in the meantime. It may even be left alone if they just drop it a little bit more left alone, I guess. So
yeah, it actually took a court injunction to get the church to stop stalking her.
Even after they
was happening.
That's terrifying. I do want to shift gears slightly because that's all very scary. But so you had talked about how you were somewhat brought up in the church, but it wasn't forced on you, and then you got involved in the church later. I wanted to ask you, because South Park has done this, and a few other people have talked about Scientology the way, or at least have been critical. They may not be ex-Scientologists, but I've seen counter arguments and counter media to them. My question to you is, what are the main psychological tools they use, and how do those tools make sure that even skeptics are susceptible to their nonsense?
Yeah, this is again a good question, because I've had a number of people comment on my YouTube videos and in my blog articles about how you have to be a moron to fall for Scientology, and only idiots do that, and it's really not. It's so wrong-headed to think that anybody can fall for this. And the way they do it is they get a person to open up emotionally. We are all emotional creatures. We all have emotions, and we all have personal problems and past trauma and things that we consider are, non-optimum about ourselves, things we'd like to change or improve. And Scientology goes right after that. When you first go in and start talking to them, they do this personality test where they have you answer these 200 crazy ass questions and then come up with this scientific looking graph that is your personality. How happy you are, how in communication you are, how responsible or irresponsible you are, and then they basically do, what I call, it's like a warm reading, not a total cold reading, because you started telling them about yourself. And then you open up even more. You start answering questions they're asking you as they're going over this personality test with you. And the thing they're looking for is it's what they call your ruin. The thing that is ruining your life, the thing you think you need to handle. And a lot of people have these, especially during moments of emotional problems or loss or stress. Who doesn't have problems with their job or their wife or their husband or their kids? Or, who doesn't have that? Everybody has that. So if you're willing to walk in there and somebody looks like they really care and they really want to help you with that, and then they offer you a solution that they swear will work and will actually handle that problem for you, you become sold on that. It's not hard. I've done it personally with people hundreds of times. People are very open to this, and so that emotional vulnerability is what they prey on, and then they pull you in, and then they make you, and then you sign up for a service that it's $50, $100. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
And you do that service, and maybe it helps you, and maybe it doesn't. But the very idea that you're with people who are willing to listen to you and understand you and care about you, that is the thing that keeps you on board. Because you're now part of a group, and this group are people you can trust, right? This is the idea. And so then you're sucked in, and then you do the next service, and and it's just $150 or $200. And then you do the next one and the next one, and the whole time they start indoctrinating you and telling you about these really high-level services that are going to give you amazing abilities and an amazing life that you have only dreamed of before. And the very promise of that is what keeps you going.
And it's kind of like a gradient too, where they kind of ease you into it, so you never get the shock of jumping into the cold pool. You never get that, oh, this doesn't feel good anymore. You never notice it doesn't feel good anymore because you've already been in it for 5 years, and somewhere along those lines it stopped feeling so good.
Well, that's exactly right. It's the lobster in the boiling water analogy. That's exactly what it is. The water is nice when the lobster first gets in there, and then before he knows it, he's being burned alive. And it's like, get me out of here, but it's too late.
And this is something for everybody to know, because this is how all cults or control groups work. They all function like this.
Exactly.
So like, even though I wasn't in such a high control group, I was able to like, take a look at a Jehovah's Witness pamphlet and call things out, and then people would say, hey, how did you know all this stuff if you're not a Jehovah's Witness? Well, it's just, you would be able to look at that pamphlet and say, yep, you know, I think this is definitely good information for anybody who might interact with a cult.
There's also, you were saying, I'm glad you brought up the fact that they make you like buy a book, or they make you take like just a course at a very small amount. Because there was a YouTube video I watched about like the psychological aspect of it, what they do. Chris kind of spoke to it a little bit. He was talking about the emotional side. The other thing they do psychologically with those, you just need to buy this book, or you just need to do this one little course. Like it's only $50. Just come on, it's cool. On top of the fact that people are going to be drawn in by the emotion of it and having someone listening to them, they're also going to feel invested, and they don't want to feel like they've been duped. They don't want to feel like they've wasted their time or their money. So they're going to have a little bit of cognitive dissonance in favor of the thing.
Because
just a little bit.
Yeah,
it's just a little tiny bit, just a little bit, right? They just start a little bit, and then the investment becomes a little more and a little more, and the more you get into that, the more money you spend, the more time you spend going to 8-hour courses and then dropping several $1,000s on it. You then start feeling like it has to matter to you, because otherwise, look at all the time you waste, look at all the money you wasted. That's a really dangerous thing to couple with the kind of emotional support that they end up providing you.
Yeah. Do they offer any quick fixes? Like, do they say this course will fix this part of your life, or is it more of like, okay, this will improve this aspect of your life so you can get to this level, or is it this particular course will fix this issue?
What they do is they promise to handle that ruin that you have when you first walk in. And I actually talk about this in detail, how they wrangled me in through communication. Because I was 15 years old, I was shy, I was introverted, I couldn't talk to girls, and I couldn't get dates. And so this communications class was going to totally handle that for me. And what it did was, what I talk about in the book is how it gave me this false sense of confidence. I held my head a little higher, and I looked at people in the eye when I talked to them. But I didn't get any more dates because I didn't have any more savvy about what to say, right? So it was a little bit silly, because here's this promise of you're going to communicate better, and by doing that, you're going to handle all the problems of your life. You know, they definitely overpromise and underdeliver. But just like she was just saying, like Stephanie was just going over, there's a confirmation bias that occurs where you accept that because you can hold your head a little higher and talk a little bit more directly, you're so much better now. And then then you're willing to take the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And every step is designed to get you onto what they call their bridge to total freedom, which is a series of steps that they promise. You know, it's a one-size-fits-all. Everybody does all of these steps. And at the end of it, you will achieve personal spiritual immortality and total freedom, right? As a being, as a spiritual being. So, you know, that's the con. That's the pitch.
What happens, real quick, to those who go through a class and then they walk out of it thinking, this didn't fix anything? Like, what happens when somebody says, this doesn't seem to be working, or they start noticing the absence of positive evidence in their life towards this idea?
Well, there are corrective actions that can be taken that the church will try to do on a person in order to fix the problem, right? They'll go back and, you know, see if there's anything in the course materials the guy didn't understand, or, you know, they'll kind of sit down with them and see if there's a lot of looking at the individual to see what he's doing wrong, that it's not working on him. because it's never Scientology's fault that Scientology isn't working. And this is also something I go over in a lot of detail in the book, because it's a key characteristic of any destructive cult, and Scientology excels at this, that it's never L. Ron Hubbard's fault, it's never Scientology's fault. So therefore, if it's not working on you, what's wrong with you that this isn't happening or working right? And they're very, very, very good at introverting your attention onto you, and therefore convincing you that the reason it's not working is because you're not doing it enough and you need more.
Only focus on the positive evidence, and if there's any lack of evidence for the church being right, then that is something that you have done wrong that you need to work better on. So that's consistent, like you said, it's consistent with cults. So
I mean, it's consistent with
it's very
any control
consistent
group.
with cults.
Any control group.
I mean, it's also consistent with pseudoscience. How many times have you gone to some pseudoscientist, or like some kind of faith healer or what have you, and they say, oh, well, it works for everybody else. What are you doing wrong? Or what's wrong with you? Or maybe, Satan's got you, or you have a demon attached. So there's always something that you're doing wrong that isn't their fault.
Yeah,
There's
I mean,
always.
it's just consistent with wrong think. The way that human beings thinking can go wrong, but this is a huge way in which our thinking can go wrong that's consistent within pretty much every person that is easy to tack onto and control. And
Exactly.
use.
No,
so that's
and-
why it's kind of just shows up everywhere that's bad.
And it's not so much, like you pointed out, it's not so much an aspect or, it's not so much an aspect of each pseudoscience or each cult. It's something in us that they're preying on, which is a level of gullibility that unfortunately evolution is kind of selected for reasons. But it's fine. As long as you think critically, you can at least, I'm not saying it's a lot of people can think critically and still be Scientologists, but it will at least help guard against it. One of the other harms that it causes, if I understand this correctly, is their stance on medicine can cause people to avoid certain treatments. There was a story I heard about a woman, I think was OT8 in the church, and said that she didn't need to get cancer treatment because she was immortal. That stuff doesn't kind of harm her. She was dead in, I think, a year or 6 months.
Yeah, they have certain what they call auditing procedures, which is their version of counseling, and a lot of Scientologists are convinced that at a certain level, which is a very high up level, they have these upper levels called the OT levels, or the operating Satan levels, and that's the confidential stuff. That at operating level 5 is where they start introducing counseling methods that are going to cure you of any physical ailments or problems or situations. And so many Scientologists at that level will tend to think that that is the cure or handling that they need, rather than getting actual valid medical treatment. Now, there's no particular church policy that says you cannot go and see a doctor or anything like that. And of course, in fact, there were many cases where people were sent to a doctor because they had some kind of physical problem. But there is this belief that starts sparking in at that level that anything that's wrong with you is something that you're creating spiritually, and therefore it needs to be addressed spiritually.
Staying on the OT stuff, this book has been described as probably one of the most complete reviews of the OT levels. And I put a lot of time and attention on that chapter on that. And I think maybe for the viewers, just to give them kind of another kind of condensed version of what this, because we had just talked about it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful to just kind of go over what operating Thetans are and what their place is in the church and the belief system.
Totally. Operating Thetan is the goal of Scientology. It's the thing that they are promising you as the ultimate reward. It is basically, Thetan is the word in Scientology for a spiritual being. They don't use the word ghost or spirit, they use the word Thetan. And so you are a Thetan, according to Scientology. You're not your body, you're not your mind, you are this spiritual being that has been around forever and will be continuing to be around forever. That transcends any body experience or even life in the physical universe, as they call it here. So an operating Thetan is is a Thetan or a spiritual being who has been restored back to his native abilities and awareness, because obviously here on earth none of us know that we're spiritual beings and we don't have superpowers and all of this kind of thing, right? And the reason for that is because of all the traumatic past stuff that's happened to us that we've forgotten our true nature. And Scientology promises to restore that, and that is what the OT levels and all of Scientology is really promising to do. And it's only going to cost you about $1 million, but hey, what's $1 million versus your personal spiritual immortality, right? That's sort of the way it's weighed out. So you have these upper confidential levels or services that Scientology offers. And they're confidential because they're supposed to be so powerful and so amazing that if you were exposed to that information before you're ready for it, that it could literally kill you because of the seriousness of the past trauma that it addresses, the things that have happened to us in the past. Well, I detail all of that in the book, and I think it's probably the single most complete condensation of all of that information in one place.
How far did you get through the levels?
While I was in Scientology, I got up to the level of clear, which is the sort of the gateway to the OT levels, but I never made it onto the OT levels. I found out about all that stuff after I got out. So I never did those levels while I was in. Clear it was the initial promise of the book Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, back in 1950. That was the big goal to start with, was clear, becoming clear. And that means you no longer had this part of your mind that was causing you all of this pain and suffering and making you do things that you really didn't want to do. Like beating your kid or reacting harshly or, this kind of thing. Dianetics promised to get rid of all that and handle all that for you, and so you would be clear. Your mind would be clear of all this past trauma.
Well, we know it probably didn't clear all the negative things in your life, but was there any positive effects on how you treated other people? Like, did you notice? Yeah.
Absolutely. You can't be involved in something like this for 27 years and not have some gains. I certainly helped a lot of people over the years that I was in. I salvaged marriages. I got some people off drugs. I helped people with their interpersonal problems a lot. I did a lot of that work because that was what I was there for. That's what I wanted to do. That's why I joined up with Scientology in the first place. Yeah. So I've mentioned since then that a lot of that help was given sort of despite Scientology rather than because of it. I had this natural inclination to help, and many Scientologists do. That's why they're there. People aren't part of Scientology because they're morons, and they're not part of Scientology because they want to be conned out of their money or they want to go bankrupt. Nobody joins a cult, right? They join because they want to help and they want to be helped. And it's a pretty worthwhile purpose. And unfortunately, the whole thing is a con. It's not what it says it is. So there's a lot of people in that group helping a lot of other people. And the principles that work in Scientology and that help you are actually things Hubbard ripped off from other people and called his own. And that's another big point that I make in the book is I go into detail about exactly how he did that. So, because it's not obvious, a lot of people think that things in Scientology are unique to Scientology, and they're not at all. So much of it is plagiarized.
You'd be surprised too how much crossover there is from one cult to another, one control group to another. One of the things that I thought was really interesting after I left the church that I was a part of was one, I did realize that I went in for compassionate reasons, and a lot of people in there were really good people, and it was hard for me to kind of see the church as a bad entity because the church was made up of these good people that I loved, right? So is there kind of a sense of the Church of Scientology being kind of a compassionate source, and how does that justify for people who are giving all this money to this compassionate source? Yes,
very definitely. All Scientologists rail against and don't understand criticism of the church because they think that they're part of this very compassionate, very helping group that is doing nothing but good for the world. And unfortunately, they have blinders on, just like I did for many, many years, as to the actual help that's being given. The church trumpets itself as this leader in humanitarian causes and getting people off drugs and getting people educated and all these humanitarian works that they do. But whenever you actually look and fact check their claims, you find out one for one that they're lying through their teeth. And the Scientologists take it on faith that what they're being told by their leaders is true, and they don't fact check it. And when you do fact check it, you find out, it's all nonsense. We didn't go in and rescue all these people from this tsunami, in Thailand. They sent 5 guys over, and they sent some camera crew over to make it look like this, incredible activity was going on when it didn't happen. And so that's why Scientologists are sort of led by the nose in thinking that they are doing a lot more good in the world than they're actually doing. And they continue to give over money because they think they're supporting these causes, and they're not. But, it's all a big kind of Truman show,
Is that what you would call why they believe they're saving the world? To take a chapter from your book?
Yeah, that chapter in my book goes into the belief system, and they believe that they're saving the world in a spiritual sense because of these services and whatnot that they're doing. And they also think they're saving the world because of these humanitarian programs that they're being told about that are just puff pieces, that don't exist. So, the whole thing is just kind of a big sham. And it takes stepping out a little bit and giving it just a little bit of critical thinking, which is what I happen to do, and the whole thing starts falling apart. And that is actually why more and more people are leaving Scientology now than are joining.
What would you say, just in your experience with Scientology? I guess this is a question actually for both of you, since you were both in various levels of control groups and cults. What do you think is the most important or the most destructive aspect of brainwashing and the process of it?
I think in the world of Scientology, there's a suppression there's an emotional suppression that occurs. You start getting the idea that you're so much better because of the counseling, the auditing that you receive, that you start having a very fake and plastic sort of personality and attitude towards life because you think you're supposed to. And you think that that you've removed past trauma, and so it can no longer affect you. But the fact of the matter is, it does still affect you. It is still very real, and you still have those emotional and psychological issues. But you paint it over with this facade of happiness, and everything is always so great. And you see that with Scientologists. They're always smiling, and they always have to put on this forced sort of exaggerated happiness with their lives, when in fact many of them are very miserable. But they can't let themselves feel that way, because if they did, then they would have to acknowledge that Scientology doesn't work. And they can't let themselves go there, especially because they become so invested in time and money and resources that their whole life kind of becomes this fake shell. And it took me, after I got out of it, years. It took me a full year before I even realized I might possibly start, have an emotional issue or two. and it's been a recovery process ever since then for me personally to recover my ability to actually feel what I feel. And it's a little hard to explain. I hope that encapsulates it, but it's that the sort of the facade is kind of stripping away from me now, and it's so obvious how it instills it. And again, I describe all that in detail in my book.
That sounds a lot like the personality I describe for Mormons, if I'm being honest. It's too happy. It's. I'm not saying you're not allowed to be really, really happy and bubbly, but my goodness, they come off as fake.
It's very fake. So
Yeah.
my heart just went like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm just, yeah.
I mean, do you think that was? I mean, as far as your stuff
absolutely,
went,
especially when you said like there was a year that it took for you to realize that maybe like who you were emotionally as a person was not who you had personified yourself or created yourself to be within the movement, within the church. It took me about that long for me to realize that there were things that I never thought that I would even have liked, that wouldn't terrify me, that wouldn't cause me to crash like emotionally as a human being, that I can go and do now because I don't have this heavy, okay, I can't do that because that would hurt me kind of feeling towards everything. So I think that one of the biggest issues, that other than what you've said, is the in-group, out-group mentality. You cannot have a friendship, even in the group that I was a part of, the same way with someone outside of your group that you can within your group. Because even if you have a friendship that's anywhere near close, you're always thinking about, if you're a good person within that church, you really care about people, you're always thinking about how to convince them that you're right.
That is
you cannot have a friendship.
Totally correct. The black and white, us versus them sort of thinking, where the Scientologists are all on the good side and on the one side, and everybody else can't really be trusted to the same degree until you can somehow make them a member of the flock, and then they're one of the good people, And Scientologists even have a word for people who are not Scientologists. It's a pejorative British term. The word is wog. And this was a word that the British invented to degrade people from India. And Hubbard adopted this word into Scientology parlance, and this is the word they use for anybody who's not a Scientologist. Oh, they're a wog. And there's very much an us, we're here on one side and the rest of the world is out there somewhere, and they're not as good as us. And so the friendships, one of the things that the disconnection that occurs in Scientology is incredibly destructive, because Scientologists will disconnect, will leave, will disassociate from family, friends, business associates that they've known for decades if Scientology tells them to. That's pretty destructive.
Yeah.
And it's ruined lives and ruined families. And there are mothers to this day who are still, and fathers who are yearning to reconnect with their children who are stuck in Scientology.
And you leave and you have nothing.
Yeah, you go out and I did 27
no
years of service to Scientology. Yeah. I worked for the Sea Org for 17 years, and when I left, my severance was $500. See ya, wouldn't want to be ya. Mm-hmm. And a year later they expel me because I start finding out what's actually going on, and I lose everything. I lost a fiance. I lost friends I'd had for 20 years. Just overnight, they would not talk to me ever again. And to this day, none of them will even look at me.
Okay.
And that's pretty harsh, and that's the consequences of being in a destructive cult is you risk losing everything.
I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses have a similar dissociative aspect to the religion.
I've been doing a lot of research into them.
Yeah,
so. We have about 5 more minutes left. I think we're going to ask one more question and allow you to kind of pimp your book. So
exactly. So I wanted to know, because this is from one of the chapters of your book, but I think it's a really good question, because we might have just a very, very tacit understanding of Scientology and what they believe. But what do you think, aside from the Xenu and the alien spirits, what do you think is the most powerful lie Scientology tells, either to the public or to its members?
Well, I think the most powerful lie, the one that actually impinges the most on people and gets them involved in it, is that it is a source of actual help to people on a long-term basis, that it actually provides a methodology that will, without question, improve your life and make you a happier, healthier, more wholesome person across every aspect of your existence. And that's just not proven out by the facts. I don't, you know, you can look at that statement I just said and go, well, that's Chris's opinion, and and Joe Schmo feels better. Well, that's very subjective, but when you really look at it, you're not looking at healthier, happy, wholesome people. You're looking at destroyed, bankrupt people.
I mean, I think one thing that helps people fully realize people is being able to think for yourself.
Yeah.
And not having, because Scientology is controlling so much for them.
Well, you could say it's a subjective, feeling. How do you measure how wholesome, like how put together a person is, or how happy a person is? There is a subjective aspect of it, but we can criticize methods of religions and cultures and different things. We can criticize their beliefs and their epistemology and get to the point where we can, with an outsider's look, judge whether or not those people are more likely to be happy or not. And it just does not seem that giving 27 years to a group that won't allow you to leave for more than like $500, it definitely doesn't seem like doesn't seem like a compassionate organization.
And even more, I mean, the $500 is like whatever, but the fact that, within a year they did everything they could to ruin my life.
Yeah.
Because I, started getting an inkling of what was actually going on and started speaking out publicly against it. This is not a turn the other cheek religion. This group is not a live and let live group. It's written into the very DNA of Scientology that if you go against them, the policy states specifically ruin them utterly. So this is not a you don't get a free pass from these guys if you start exposing what they're actually doing.
All right.
So Chris, I wanted to give you about a minute or so to just kind of talk about the book and where people can possibly get it, if it's on Amazon or anything else you want to talk about the book that we didn't get to. You got about 1 minute.
Yeah, absolutely. It is available as a paperback and ebook on Amazon.com and all around the world on every Amazon outlet. So it's easy to get there. I'm also now recording an audiobook version of it, and I expect within a couple weeks I will have that up for sale also. And I believe it's probably one of the most complete critical analyses of Scientology that exists. It's not a memoir. My story is only chapter 1. The rest of the book covers the subject of Scientology from an insider's perspective. I'm not making any claims to be unbiased. I do feel that Scientology is a destructive cult, and I make a case throughout the entire book as to why that is that way.
Awesome.
I think it's a good case.
We think it's a good case too, and we think that you make a good case. Paul, thank you for coming on.
Thanks
so much,
guys.
Chris. Bye everybody, and have a skeptical new year.
Yay.